My name is Jason.
My name is Judd.
And this is The Sixth Ring, a podcast about the Trophy tabletop role-playing game.
And today we're going to talk about culture.
Setting out.
So, Judd, I have lately been thinking a lot about play culture, how play culture has changed the way I look at games, how it affects my own game designs, and specifically how Trophy creates play culture by engaging its mechanics. And I kind of wanted to just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
So it's probably helpful to start with what is play culture, and I'm not sure there's an easy, clean definition, but to me, it's the things that your play group brings to the table that exist outside the rules of the game being played.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, so much gets handed down, especially in the days before podcasts and all this. Things really got handed down verbally, and that was the way you kind of learned how things were done.
Well, I think like some examples are probably helpful. So in the Gauntlet, for example, we do pre-session procedures like CATs or similar things. We do debrief procedures. That's part of the Gauntlet's play culture. Just the act of doing those things is part of our play culture. The posing of questions, like we discussed a couple episodes ago, that's a part of play culture, I think, because frequently games don't have the posing of questions built into their rules, but it's something that you can do at the table because that's what you do.
Yeah.
Fudging the dice or allowing retcons, that can be part of your play culture, I think.
According to RPG Twitter, it's still a thing.
It's still a thing. You know what? Dice fudging, much like pumpkin spice and taxes, is always around the corner. So I think jumping out of character to discuss what's happening with your character, that's a play culture thing. Basically, anything your table does that is not in the rules of the game, but it's something you're all accustomed to doing in order to enjoy your play.
Mm-hmm.
I started by saying that I've been thinking a lot about how play culture affects my thinking. And in particular, I've become really aware of the ways I've changed over the last 7 or 8 years with regards to what I value in gaming and how play culture has affected that. Let me unpack that a little bit. So when I first got back into role-playing games in 2012, I was very focused on rules because I had just been immersed in the European board game scene for like a decade. And so to me, rules were really important. And I thought that if your role-playing game needed to be house ruled or had parts that needed to be ignored, then your game was kind of broken, right? Like I had that really strong opinion, and many people still have that opinion. I started to shift around 2016 or so. And at that time, I started to believe that a play culture, a strong play culture, can make any game work. That really came about because I started playing more OSR type things and even started dipping my toes into more older trad systems, right? Just to say that I had like a comprehensive background in role-playing games. And I found that while those games weren't perfect, the group of people I was playing with, we had a very solid foundation of play that allowed us to have fun, even though those games were a little clunky. Has that been your experience?
I vividly remember sitting on my mom's front steps with my teenage gaming friends and trying to figure out what makes a good session. And it was like, how do you turn lead to gold? Like, how do we do it? Like, I know it happens sometimes, but what does it? And my teenage years, probably into college, I was very much like the system doesn't matter. It's some kind of alchemy of the people at the table and their excitement. What I found is that the system, I think, can help.
Yes.
It's like the metaphor I've been using is it's not everything, but it does matter. I want to swim with the stream. I don't want to have to swim against the stream to get where I'm going. And so I'd rather put my effort in other places.
That's 100% fair. And I'll say that I agree with that. When the system and the rules are really solid and don't need to be fiddled with, and you can just trust them, it does create space to do other things in your role play that you might not have been able to do otherwise.
Yeah, no, that said, I think the topic you've got going here is way more interesting than that, right? Like, people have been talking about system stuff forever.
Right.
But the culture of play is like the tablecloth that goes over that table. It's like, it's kind of more important.
I have this phrase that I coined a number of years ago, which was system matters, but play culture matters more.
Right.
That was my little phrase. I think I've even moved beyond that a little bit, because now, especially after a short conversation I had with Emily Care-Boss a while back, I've started to think about the ways that games can foster good play culture just by engaging their mechanics. Like, how can you build play culture into the rules? Now, a very obvious way this happens lately is people building safety tools into their rule set.
Yeah,
I think that's a way of like taking play culture and putting it into your rule set. But even like non-safety things related to collaborative storytelling, for example, I think Trophy's very good at this. There are ways that the game can encourage a certain type of play. And so I bring up Trophy because where I think Trophy is interesting is that thing that Trophy does, the negotiated risk roll, that little conversation is a thing that you can do in all of your games. Like, you can have a little conversation about what would we like to see happen, even if you don't call it formally the devil's bargain or whatever.
Right.
You can still get into that style of play and make that a part of your play. How do you feel about the idea of systems encouraging play culture, or sort of creating a culture of play at your table?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully they're feeding into one another. I don't want to play Burning Wheel with a group of people who don't want to learn a robust White Dwarf dense rule system, right? And that's why, like, I picked Trophy Gold for my Thursday night group very specifically, because I knew the people who were playing, I knew their relationship to rules, I knew that this was something that they would engage with. It. Like, this is like the perfect density of rules, right? They're going to engage with it. All you really have to learn is the devil's bargain. What I'm finding is they're learning a lot more than that, right? They're starting to like ask each other really good questions.
Right.
I'm like, damn, I should have asked that. That's really good.
Right,
like my friend, I had no idea that my friend Anthony is like this world-class question asker. And he's just like asking questions. And I'm like, oh my goodness, why didn't I think of that? Like that's an amazing question, and really getting things out of people that are amazing. It's nice to see. And hopefully it's a symbiotic relationship where they're feeding into one another and one makes the other work. The thing you can get from players giving devil's bargains is how dark is this trophy game going to be?
Right, yeah.
Is it going to be weird ghost babies, or is it just going to be kind of, how dark is it going to be? I think you can get a decent gauge of that from what people start suggesting, because you can turn down the devil's bargain is a real important part of it.
Yeah.
Is because you can say like, oh, well, what if the ghost baby that you lost comes back? And the person's like, no, let's not go there. Can we just like walk away from the ghost babies, please? And you're like, oh, yeah, sure. I think you can start to gauge in an informal way, and not informal, in a very formal way, what the players are up for in this horror game through that conversation.
I like that example you've used because it's almost like mechanizing consent.
Yeah.
And that's a play culture thing. Like the idea of consent at the table, that's a huge play culture issue. There are lots of games that do this. The one that comes to mind just offhand is the Jane Austen game, Good Society?
Good Society.
Yes, Good Society. That has a mechanic whereby essentially the whole core of it is like sort of offering story possibilities that you can agree to or not agree to. It's got this like idea of consent. And again, it's like by engaging those rules, you sort of help foment this particular type of play culture. And I'm just really interested in this as an idea, not just in a gameplay sense, but in a design sense. I had this very much in the forefront of my mind when I wrote my game, Brindlewood Bay. I think it's something that obviously games do. It's perhaps not always an intentional thing the designer does, but I think if we can approach play culture with a certain degree of intentionality, both in game design and in running games, I think we just create better table space.
Yeah. By having those conversations, you'll find out what the play culture is of the other people who are there. You might have a buddy at the table who is next to you who comes from this deep immersion, no metagaming, I'm putting that in like air quotes, and let's not go out of game. And so that's a huge difference. Like you might have to wiggle around and find where the middle ground is, or try that style for a while and find your comfort. Yeah. So you really get it a lot in how to refine that, because you've been playing through the Gauntlet Online community. So you've probably played with
so many different types of people.
Yeah.
I mean, literally hundreds of people.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's all I wanted to say about that. Let's move on to the next segment.
Clawing for gold.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about a Trophy Dark incursion called Court of the Radiant King. My theme word justification here is this incursion takes place in Carcosa. and Carcosa is kind of a thing in the culture the last few years, especially since True Detective, but also, it's a literature thing, it's a gaming thing. A little shaky. premise, I know. But this incursion is excellent. It's by Nicholas Masick. It was originally published by Nicholas on his itch.io page. We actually picked it up for Codex and published it in Codex Yellow 2 as well. That's not even out yet for general purchase. It was released only to Patreon and now it's gone. So we're going to direct people to go pick up Nicholas's version. They're very, very similar. So Court of the Radiant King. Basically, the treasure hunters are exploring some ruins in a forest near a mirrored lake in hopes of reaching the court of the fabled Radiant King, who is a sort of... It never says it explicitly, but it's basically kind of a Hastur stand-in. Finding this fabled Radiant King and acquiring the valuable offerings that people have made to him over the years. It has the theme of masks. I actually got a chance to run this recently, and it went really, really well. But I'm curious, just from a read, what'd you think, Judd?
I loved it. I mean, I'm a huge True Detective fan, so it was cool to see a deep dive into Carcosa. It is every bit as creepy as I thought it would be.
As you want it to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really good. I really liked how the mask theme is incorporated throughout. I love where the faces are in every ring. They're not necessarily where you expect them to be, but they're in cool places. That really resonated for me. At one point, there are statues with shields, and it's not the statues' faces, it's the faces on the shield. And I just thought that was a really cool decision. I can't articulate why, but I just like it. I like the idea that you could see the face of someone important to you on a shield rather than on the statue. It just makes them almost even more of a inconsequential thing that is being used by someone else. It's really cool. It plays into the whole theme really well.
And in play, that moment is actually really fun. It's a great, cool, creepy moment. We had that one in our game. I thought the theme was also incorporated really, really well. I really like this condition that reads, "You start to notice the seams at your companions' faces and are filled with a desire to, quote, unmask them." That's pretty great.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, it's super creepy from the jump. Like in Ring 1, you have another quote here. "The old road to the court lies through a bleak and desolated plain of dry, withered grass that moans and whistles with the wind." It's so poetic, very descriptive.
Yeah.
Peppering the plain at long intervals are blasted trees lining the path and tall, strangely shaped and somber-colored standing stones. Carved in each stone and into the bark of each tree is a mask-like face, uncomfortably glancing toward the next tree or stone, as if in anticipation of some unspoken event, in silent expectation of the treasure hunter's journey. It's so cool. Like, that moment in play is so awesome, and just the poetry with which this is written just really brings it alive.
Yeah. There's also something interesting in Ring 3 where you're kind of in the court and it says, here are some example rooms. And
yes, yeah.
I definitely would, if I was running this, have this printed out and then have my own ideas for rooms scrawled on the sidebar there, because it would be very difficult to read this adventure and not come up with at least half a dozen more room ideas of things that you could see. Probably more than that once you get characters and start hearing character histories and start asking good questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, questions is a great thing to segue to, because something that this incursion does that I was super impressed with is it kind of runs itself in a way. Of all the incursions I've run recently for Dark, the incursion is structured with so much GM support that it's really, really easy to run. You can just kind of go through it line by line and kind of have players react and just kind of continue after they react. And it works great. And the questions are a big part of that. It's loaded with questions. You don't have to use them all, but there's enough of them to where you can sort of strategically choose which questions you want to pose to the players. And that's kind of your main job as the GM in this incursion, because once the players start answering those questions, your story just takes off and takes on a life of its own. And it just comes off so good. Last thing I'll say about this, Ring 4 and Ring 5 are awesome in this one. Now, my players all died at Ring 4, so we didn't actually get to play Ring 5, but on the page at least, Ring 5 is pretty awesome. Ring 4 and Ring 5, so dazzling. It's a pair of scenes that operate on a kind of operatic scale, in my opinion. They're just so epic and so wild that you just get so caught up in it. It's just super cool stuff.
Nice.
Definitely read those specifically, listeners. If you are not going to have a chance to play Court of the Radiant King, they are awesome.
Yeah, it made me want to go back and like rewatch True Detective, and just with a notebook, totally and only for the mask theme. Like, be like, I'm just looking for mask themes. Like, I know there are 2 lines in particular where like somebody says, "Take off your mask," and then there's another one where he says, "I can see your soul leaking out from behind your eyes." But yeah, I definitely just want to go back and watch the whole damn thing and just look for that.
What I think is interesting here in this incursion is you actually get a few different flavors of Carcosa, because Carcosa, I don't know how much you keep up with Carcosa, but like Carcosa has been presented in so many different ways in various mediums. And so in True Detective, you get this sort of like cosmic horror kind of version of Carcosa, and there's a lot of that here. But there's also the literary Carcosa, which is much more like focused on art and artistic communities. There's a lot of that in this as well.
Nice.
This does not have the sort of Masters of the Universe OSR Carcosa thing going on in it.
Right.
But that is another version of Carcosa. Nicholas has definitely touched on some of the ideas of Carcosa and sort of worked them into this incursion in a way that feels really, really good. To be fair, the incursion doesn't say it takes place in Carcosa necessarily. So I think you could run this in various settings and like you don't have to get hung up on the Carcosa thing. Here, I think Carcosa is more of a meme, you know?
Yeah.
or an idea more than like a place.
Yep.
Before we leave this segment, I want to just throw out a couple of things for listeners, because this is the Clawing for Gold segment, so I'm going to claw for your gold. First, well, this is not a gold thing, but I do want to mention that my run of Court of the Radiant King is on YouTube, so you can go watch that on YouTube if you want. I'll have a link to that playlist in the show notes. Another thing I want to tell you about is we are starting a new Trophy Gold publishing initiative via our Codex magazine. For the foreseeable future, we're going to have in every issue of Codex at least one new Trophy Gold incursion in it. And we're kicking off this month in Codex Leviathan with 3 wonderful Trophy Gold incursions. So just something to be on the lookout for there, listeners.
Yeah, and I feel like this could be a really cool follow-up. I'm chaining things together a bunch with Trophy Dark and Trophy Gold very often, but you could run a cool Cthulhu Dark game where every character who gets lost ends up in this game.
Oh, that's actually a great idea. Yeah, I love that.
And then you run their doom as they like walk through Carcosa, whatever that metaphorically really means or doesn't mean. I just think that'd be a lot of fun. It's really just really a fun thematic thing. And I think modern people would almost make it weirder in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Modern meaning like the 20s or wherever you're doing your Cthulhuing.
Or you could run it in Call of Cthulhu and then go to this.
Totally.
And never go back and play Call of Cthulhu again.
Okay there.
They've had 7 editions to get it right. I'm sorry. Let's go to the next segment.
Into the Forest Dark.
All right. We are talking about what today, Judd?
Culture, which is great. It's a good topic. It's been on everybody's mind with a lot of like D&D discussions about evil orcs. I'm fascinated by that discussion. So it's cool to see this come up at our table and on the show.
Portraying fantasy cultures. I love it. I'll tell you why I love it. I think we have been trained by decades of fantasy fiction to reduce whole species of creatures to be either monolithically good or evil. It's kind of what you were suggesting there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good discussion out there right now about how this is very racist or colonialist thinking, and I don't disagree. But also, I think it's just kind of boring.
Yeah.
Like, I think
that's totally my argument. And
yeah.
It's fascinating. On the online discussions, when I posted things about it, everyone who came in who, following a link or a D&D hashtag or whatever, was like, but if there's no evil, how do we kill things? And I was like, oh shit, that's the only time you kill things? Like, that can't be true. Like, that absolutely can't be true. I was just fascinated and a little disturbed by that discussion of, I've got to have the green light and be told it's all right. And in a country where there's literally like a bit about savage Indians in our founding documents of a country. That's upsetting. And it's a mess. So but also I think it's just not interesting. Like, I think it's more interesting.
I think
it's way more interesting if the orcs have a reason, and there's, you've got to do some world building to figure out, well, why are they there?
Or if they're just portrayed with some nuance.
Right.
I mean, I think that I will fess up to, I am not personally super invested in a lot of the discussions that like surround the hobby related to the hobby's love affair with colonialist thinking.
Right.
Like, I acknowledge it. It's definitely true. It's just not my particular... I could be supportive and not think about it too much, I think. It's kind of where I fall just for my personal bandwidth or whatever, right? To me, it's more like, I just don't think it's as interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's more interesting to portray them in a nuanced way. Think about this. We already have a huge hurdle in role-playing games in making things believable at the table, because we are not equipped, for example, with VFX.
Right.
We're not equipped with actors or set decorators, apart from just whatever characterizations we bring to it. Our only tool is just the authenticity with which we describe things, I think. And a nuanced cultural portrayal is part of that. I feel like you actually enhance believability if you present a culture in a way that reads and that is not like reduced to just this dumb, like, oh, they're just these evil beasts or whatever.
Yeah.
We already have so many hurdles to make things believable. Why make it even more unbelievable?
Yeah. And why, I don't know, why play the bad guys? As soon as someone tells me, like, hey, there are these people over there and they're just evil and they're eating babies, like, I would be like, wait a minute. We need to think about who's telling us this and what their deal is.
It's like going straight to 11 as well, right? Like, where do you go from there?
Who says that kind of thing in the real world? And who actually does say that? And who do they say it about? And why do they say it? I just think everything in fantasy doesn't have to line up metaphorically. Matter of fact, I think it's better when it doesn't. I think it's just more interesting when it's shades of gray and you're doing your best you can in a complicated world.
That example you just gave, I'm reminded of Dead Planet, which is a mothership scenario. I ran it, this is a while ago, and I discussed it on my other show, Fear of a Black Dragon, and the topic we were kind of discussing is, so in Dead Planet, it's basically a module divided up into 3 parts, and the second part is this moon colony of people who practice a ritual cannibalism.
Yeah.
And they're very upfront about it. Like, they don't like try to hide it. It's like part of their culture. And it's related to their history.
Which is how cannibalism actually works. Like, it's usually a ritual.
I don't know. Personally, I'm not like versed in that, but that makes sense to me, what little I know about history. That conversation that Tom and I had on that show was about, okay, how do you get the players to engage with this culture that is so repulsive to our modern or 2020 sensibilities? Like, eating each other for whatever reason is just something that is highly taboo.
Yeah.
And how do we get the players to want to engage with these characters in some way other than just, I'm running away or I'm killing them?
Right.
That was kind of the crux of the conversation. So when I ran that, I had that as my goal. Like, I want the players to engage with this community. I want them to take the community at face value, I guess, or whatever they're presenting, like, engage with them in like a real way. And it was a fun role-playing challenge. The module does a little bit of the work in Dead Planet because it does present some characters, NPCs, with some interesting motivations and things. But I had to really think about, how do you take something like cannibalism, this ritual cannibalism that they all practice on this moon colony, and they did it because, like, when they first landed in that moon colony, they needed to survive, and that's how they survived, is by eating little bits of each other.
Right.
So how do you take that and make that into a more sympathetic thing?
Yeah.
I made a lot of notes of like, okay, well, what does it mean for how they do courtship with one another? What does it mean for how they care for one another? Like, what does it mean for their medical care? What does it mean for like various aspects of their society? And it was an interesting exercise, and the players all appreciated it. They were like, you know what, look, I was ready to like bolt, but the more we got into it and the more we learned to be with these characters and engage with them on their terms and not just be completely repulsed by what they do, the more satisfying the experience was. And so that's my like personal gaming highlight for this concept that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Or this idea that we're talking about making fantasy cultures something believable and nuanced.
Yeah, and it makes it more interesting to engage with it. It makes it feel like you're really engaging with this alien culture. I don't feel like real world cultures are just capital E evil. That's just not the way humans operate.
Right.
To have it come from somewhere and to have it have a point, it just makes it makes the world building more lush. It makes it more interesting to get in there and interact with it. And I feel like the way that we build worlds in Trophy help with that. Like the D66 tables, so you've got 36 things, and they very often contradict each other.
Right, yeah.
Which is cool because that's what culture does. It contradicts each other.
Right,
The
yeah.
examples of monoculture that came to my mind because of the media I've been ingesting are Vulcans and Klingons. And there would totally be Vulcans who were like, oh, you know, what logic is overrated? Like there would be a subculture who just were rebelling against their parents' logic.
Right, yeah.
There would be Klingons who would be like, you know what? War is actually getting us nowhere.
Right.
Maybe we need to aggressively attack peace the way we've attacked war. I feel like the D66 tables contradicting themselves, having lots of strange little bits of a culture and a world all together, help that kind of world building take place.
Well, I'll add here just as a quick note, like you're talking about the Trophy Loom tables, right?
Yes. Yep.
And that's not out yet, listeners, although it might be by the time you're listening to this. I don't know if you're listening next year. But I think it's also in some of the incursions too, right? Like some of the published incursions have, they're more specific tables, usually related to like cultural artifacts of the setting or whatever.
Right.
But it's the same idea. I love, though, what you said about those tables is so great, because I think I'd like to transition the conversation to be like, what are some practical things we can do as either game writers or as GMs who I think operate in a similar space frequently?
Yeah.
What are some practical things we can do to portray a culture in a nuanced way, in a way that is believable, in a way that is not reductive?
Right. I think you've got to go back and forth, right, between in-game logic and out-of-game kind of vision. With the Court of the Radiant King, there's this king who's obsessed with masks and people's real identity, and what is it like to live there? And what is it like to, reside in that court? And who has survived? And who hasn't? Heaven forbid, who's been born into this court and survived, And like, if you start going that route, I think things get interesting. And then taking a step back and being like, okay, am I making something that's really vile? Because when you get too much into in-game logic, what you can find is that you're relying on tropes and you could be making something that's really toxic. And so you don't want to be, you don't want to be like, oh, the Radiant Court, wow, it really resembles Ashkenazi Jews. I didn't realize I did that. And it's like, you did. You need to step back and you need to do some editing because that's gross. I use that cultural example because I am a Jew. You've just got to like step back, and so you've got to kind of like toggle in. Okay, what's that world like? What's it like to live there and survive there? What kind of people survive in that scenario? And then toggle into the real world and be like, okay, what am I making? Yeah, I think you got to kind of go back and forth and see what is going on,
and maybe get a second opinion.
Yeah,
if you're going to be doing like, you're making up a fantasy culture that is pretty clearly inspired by real world cultures, you need to get a second opinion on that. If it's something you're publishing, you definitely need to do that. If it's something you're just running for your group, maybe you just check in with someone and you say, hey, does this feel racist? Does this feel like I'm stealing from a real world culture in a way that's offensive? Because everybody has biases, right? And everybody has blind spots. And sometimes it's helpful to get a second opinion. I don't create adventures in this way because my personal adventure writing preferences, the things I like to do, are mostly just like abandoned mystery villages where there are no people. But even in abandoned mystery villages, though, you have opportunities to develop a culture because of, via the artifacts they leave behind.
Yeah.
It never hurts to get a second opinion. Like, does this read? Does this track? Does this feel believable? Is this offensive? Like, I think it helps to like really interrogate whatever you're doing. And when I say interrogate, I mean, you kind of hit on it already, but I mean like asking really hard questions of your setting.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a community that is in the middle of a civil war. Who are the people who are silent in the Civil War? Who are the people who are like caught in the middle? Who are the people who don't want the revolution? Who are the people trying to prop up the status quo? What's their deal?
Yeah.
I think by interrogating what you're doing, you avoid the problem of all the Romulans just want to go to war, right? Or all the Vulcans are, science geniuses or whatever. And I guess the other practical thing you can do, I think, is just to emulate things that do it well, right? Like, find an adventure or a fantasy touchstone that does a really good job of portraying a culture in a very like honest and believable way, and mimic that. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and start simple. Just ask questions out. I mean, the Court of the Radiant King, like we literally just started talking about that. I did not have notes on that, and I'm already like halfway to something I like. I'm already like, wow, there are these children of the court who like carry around all of these masks and are completely hooded until they put one on because that's their identity for that time, because they've realized that their parents had one mask and that wasn't healthy or something, whatever it was. And you can get to a really weird place really fast, and a cool place. I think the weirder the better in a lot of ways, but by just asking real simple questions of strange places, it's going to get strange fast. And let it, and take it away from the real world as quickly as you can. And if you do tap into something that's real, just, definitely check in. And depending on what are you publishing it for your friends? Are you publishing it on your blog? Are you putting it for sale? Those are very different levels of engagement, and then very different levels of responsibility, quite frankly.
Right, exactly. I want to end real quick with an example of a trophy specific thing, a trophy gold specific thing that I think does culture really, really well. And that is Leviathan's Bridge by Gabriel Robinson. That's a trophy gold incursion. That was actually the winner of the contest that we had earlier this year. This is a great incursion for many reasons. What's really nice about it and impressive about it is it presents a very, very rich, nuanced world. And Gabriel says up front in the text of the incursion that it's meant to be an anti-colonialist portrayal of a community, and it is. In this particular case, it's about these goblin monks, and Gabriel set out to like present these goblins in a way that is not the normal way goblins are presented. Goblins are normally presented like Tolkien orcs. They're, quote, savages. They're there to be killed. They're stupid. And Gabriel set out to create like a community of goblins that is rich with details. They have a complex lore and history. There are lots of characters going about their lives within the community. The PCs frequently have to interact with the setting in a way that's not just kill everything and take the loot, but rather, how do we interact with this community? How do we aid this community? How do we learn more about it? And in fact, they're incentivized to do that as well. They're incentivized to interact with the culture of the place, not just trample on it. And it still has danger. I mean, there are still monsters. There are still like obstacles to overcome. But within that, you've got this really beautifully rendered community. And I think you could do a whole heck of a lot worse than like taking some notes from Leviathan's Bridge and trying to make your setting similar in vibe and flavor and tone, right? That's one of those ones that's coming out in Codex, by the way,
nice.
This month. So
cool.
Anything else you want to say about like portraying fantasy cultures?
No. I mean, I feel like we're just, man, that could be a whole podcast.
I know. Yeah. We really took on a lot.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
I talk about it a lot on Daydreaming About Dragons when the podcast that I do on my own, where I talk about pieces of media and what I would take from them. And I talk about world building a lot. So I think about this a bunch, and I don't know. I think it's a really great topic. Hopefully we'll come back to it as we go.
I think over the course of weeks and months, we'll have more to say about this for sure. This was a light sampler approach.
Yeah, and as more stuff comes out that we can grab for Clawing for Gold, I think there will be more examples of cultures out in the world that are for sale. So we'll be able to like grab those and like show examples of stuff that's being done really well, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the next segment.
Woven on the Loom.
All right. Playing around with the idea of culture, we are going to do some stuff associated with the classics, specifically Greek mythology. I have a couple of magical items inspired by Greek mythology. The first is the goat skin shield. The goat skin shield is embroidered with images associated with battle and stained red with blood. It can be marked twice, which is its principal advantage. It can be marked twice. However, it can only be repaired at a temple dedicated to a war god or at the church of a sister associated with battles. That repair may come at the cost of 1 gold as usual, or it could be something else entirely.
That's a really nice detail.
Thank you.
I really, really, really like that. It's good.
And my other magical item inspired by Greek myth is the Eye of the Grey Witches. Holding this smoky glass orb to your forehead will show you the weakness of a named monstrosity. However, the monstrosity is able to see you as well. When you next engage it in combat, you take an extra weak point.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea of like, you can see it, but it can see you.
Oh, yeah. It's evergreen. I mean, it's also, the monster can see you from where it is also very often a really good devil's bargain when you're entering into an incursion.
Absolutely.
That's a hot one. That's good.
All right, what do you got for us, Jed?
I've got Kerberos,
Nice.
which is, according to Wikipedia, often a 3-headed dog, right? But it can also... I feel like you can play with that. Maybe you want to make like a mini incursion. So it's 3 doors in an incursion where like, there's the gate to the land of the dead. Eventually a treasure hunter is going to die, and that treasure hunter's buddies are going to want to bring them back from the dead. So when that happens, here you go. You've got Kerberos to throw in front of that gate and make it a little bit more dangerous than it already is.
I love it.
Could be a 3-headed dog, could be 3 doors near the gate meant to entice you away from walking into the Deathlands. And it can also be a snake with apparently like 150 heads or more heads than anyone can count, I put.
Nice.
So I gave it an endurance 12, so it's a big one, and you're going to need some weaknesses in order to get past it. It's 6 things it does.
Habits.
2 heads bite into your body, tearing your flesh and soul apart like a rag doll. 1 head bites and shakes, causing you to drop everything. All of the heads bite at once, ripping a spell from the air and eating it like a treat. The immense body blocks a portal. It summons a ghost of someone you killed, or it just licks up your blood. And then
Nice.
Defenses, it's the Scion of legendary monsters. It can smell prey a world away. The idea, I thought, is that I need to put this in. If you take damage from Kerberos but get away, because I imagine people are going to try to very often run past it. But if you take damage from it, then Kerberos has your scent, and it's going to chase you
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like that.
for all time. Taking a note from monsters we've had in the past, from past cool contests we've seen, I'm definitely like stealing that from somebody. So somebody had that.
And that was Jim's worm thing, right? The
Yeah.
lava thing.
Yeah. The worm thing, definitely. I think that was it. Yep. From the beginning of the world. So its weaknesses, basically wearing funerary stuff, wearing a funerary mask, wearing a funerary shroud, holding 2 coins for Karen, sewing your own lips shut. All those things will shave away its endurance so that you can kill it.
I love it.
easier.
It's great. Yeah.
Eventually, they're going to want to bring someone back from the dead, I promise. And when they do, you've got the monster you need to deal with it.
I want to know what the version of it that's like just 3 doors in the incursion, what that looks like.
Yeah. But the first Traffic Gold adventure I wrote was a D&D idea I had from like 4th edition, which, I mean, you couldn't pick a D&D edition more different than Trophy Gold. But there it is. And I'm one of the few people who actually liked it. But I'm not very good at dungeon design for that type of strategic game. So anyway, it's about a bunch of kids sneaking into a dungeon to bring their friend back from the dead. And the adventurers have to go in after them because these kids are going to get themselves killed. And anyway, yeah. So it's definitely inspired by the 3 doors in that incursion.
Oh, nice. Cool. Let's go to the next segment.
Desperate and doomed.
Okay, we are going to start a little actual play segment for you listeners. Judd, you're going to be the player.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the GM.
Sounds good.
Tell us about your treasure hunter. Who are they?
Yeah, they are an orphaned mannequin.
Nice.
So they have mimicry as their background skill. I wanted an excuse to have someone who knew something about adventuring. And I think this mannequin was a practice dummy in a sword school that a judicial duelist ran for adventurers. So they just got kind of beat on by adventurers all day. And then at some point, they kind of came to life. And at that point, the school was boarded up and they made their way out into the world. Rather than call them wooden dummy, I call them woad doom.
Okay.
Their occupation is ox. It's kind of D&D Pinocchio, I think. So their skills are destruction, persistence, and strength. Their drive is to bring freedom to Tyrolus. And I've got ideas about what Tyrolus is, but we can get to that as we get to it. Their rituals are hospitality and bind, which I rolled randomly because I just wanted to roll that part randomly for whatever reason.
Sure.
And then their equipment are a 24-foot chain and manacles and a wooden labyrinth game.
Oh, nice. Oh, interesting. A question about the rituals. Maybe just remind us what they do.
So hospitality keeps trouble at bay for as long as like you're sharing food with someone.
Oh, interesting.
Which I thought was interesting for a wooden person.
Question. Do you think it's because you've spent all of your existence prior to your adventuring existence essentially serving people in the way that you did? Like,
yeah.
Is that
yeah. I like that.
From?
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a cool idea. And then I know bind, and like I think playing off of what you just said, I think I know bind because I was bound for so long.
Nice. Yeah, good. Yeah.
So I was kind of bound to a spot or like a circle where I couldn't get out.
So you acquired this fundamental understanding of binding things.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So you're an orphaned mannequin. You've described how you were orphaned. I like that. Do you consider yourself to have a maker, or is that just an unknown person?
Yeah, I think it's unknown. I think that there was like a judicial duelist who ran the school. And so I kind of looked at them as my auntie more than like a mother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I recognize that someone made me, but I just don't think it's very important, I guess.
Okay. And remind me the drive again?
Bring freedom to Tyrolis.
We'll have to explore that as we play, but I like it as an opening gambit.
I've got ideas about Tyrolis. Let's play to find out.
Yeah, we'll play to find out for sure. So, listeners, we're going to be doing an incursion, or starting with this incursion anyway, called The Huntsman's Manor. This is an incursion by our friend Natalie Ashe. It is going to eventually be in the Trophy Gold book. I'm working off the draft right now. And it begins with a poem. A light, the huntsman calls, with sun already set. The quarry springs as twilight falls, a trophy now to get. The moon above shines o'er the hunt, and hot breath fogs the air. The master surges to the front. The trophy now is there. As hot blood runs and soaks the ground, and hunger's now been paid, the pack to which you have been bound, a trophy you've been made. Now, the politically unremarkable Marquis Nirral was a hunting prodigy, building his hunting manor on the edges of the forest to hunt the most challenging prey. After his disappearance over a century ago, the manor was abandoned and left to the forest. But what amazing treasures and trophies still remain? Well, maybe you're going to find out, Wodum. Now, while the Marquis Nirral was unremarkable in political influence, he was highly regarded in his skills as a hunter. People considered it the height of folly for him to build his manor so close to the old Kaldor forest as he did, but he would only laugh and say that he built where the prey was. And for a few years he held grand hunting meets, taking friend and foe to play at the edge of the dark woods. The thrill of that proved the story of a lifetime to many guests. His own travels into the forest, on the other hand, kind of drove deeper toward the heart of the forest and took longer and longer each time. And when his final hunt left the manor ungoverned for a year, the servants turned to other masters and the lodge was left unoccupied. And so for the last century of its existence, it has lain empty. The manor's proximity to the forest dissuades most scavengers, and yet it has not dissuaded you, Wodum. Why?
I think I'm ready for this adventure. I've seen so many treasure hunters who have gone out into the world and how good they were at what they did, and I feel like now is my time, especially now that I have my freedom and I'm unbound and I'm out of the school. I just heard about Nirral and followed the signs and the trails there here to the edge of the old Kaldor forest. And also, I think there's a bit of a romance to treasure hunting around the old Kaldor forest. I think there's something special about it. So, yeah, I definitely want to get some old Kaldoran treasures.
Let's talk about some of those treasures. There is a rumor of a particularly valuable, unique treasure at Marquis Nirral's manor. Maybe roll a d6 for me.
Yeah. 2.
The treasure is known as the Black Spear. It was the Marquess's signature weapon. Some believe this blackened steel boar spear was enchanted to find the heart of its prey. My question for you, Wodum, why do you want a weapon that can find hearts?
Yeah, I want it because it's no danger to me because I don't have a heart.
Ah,
So,
good.
it'll help me kill stupid fleshbacks really easily, but it's not, there's no danger. I feel like the danger of a spear like that is that it's going to be turned on you. It's going to find your own heart eventually. But I do not need to worry about that, I think.
Very, very good. No, for sure. I love it. So then mannequins don't have hearts?
I guess not. I guess not. Or I don't think so, from what I know about myself now, which probably is not much.
Fair enough. The first set is called the Overgrown Gardens, and the set goal is to enter the manor. These once formal gardens, decorated with raised flower beds and topiaries, have become completely overgrown. Most of the flowers and trees and the path have become choked thick with blackberry brambles. And indeed, as you are sort of walking about these gardens, which are sort of like on the approach to the manor, one of those blackberry brambles sort of, it seems like it moves out of the way or snaps back as you approach it, almost like a snake.
Yeah.
And other blackberries have fallen to the ground and they've kind of split open. Their juice is thick, too thick, and red. Here I should mention that the theme of this particular incursion is pursuit. And at one point you see a row of roses has tangled to form one giant thorned bush. There's a sense of things being trapped here. There's a sense of things being torn apart here. And indeed, as you approach, what you see directly in front of you, in a little courtyard area in front of the manor, there are what appear to be several large wolves. This is the middle of the day, by the way.
Oh,
several large wolves eating from a fairly fresh corpse of something. A little off to the left, there's a greenhouse. A little off to the right, there is what appears to be a large, like a hedge maze. And then, of course, beyond the wolves, beyond the courtyard, there is the manor itself.
Nice.
What do you do? Where do you go?
I stay distant from the wolves, and I slowly unwrap the chain from around my torso, so I have enough that if they come at me, I can use it as a weapon. I kind of want to see what they do, so I probably get next to a tree. I know this isn't really the most exciting, adventurous thing, but I think the way this kind of inhuman person deals with it is he gets very still, whereas people would walk around and figure things out, or he just gets very, very still, as he was used to doing back when he was just a wooden dummy, and just kind of waits to see how the wolves play out as they eat. I don't know. Should that be a hunt roll, do you think?
That's a hunt roll,
a weird...
for sure. Yeah, no, it's definitely a hunt roll.
Cool.
Because you're asking a question about the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so you get one light die for exploiting either your skills or your equipment. So what do you think there?
Yeah.
Or no, you get one light die just because. And then
and maybe persistence?
Oh, persistence, because you're just standing still for a long time. Yeah, I like that.
Cool.
Okay, so you get one just for doing it, and then one for your persistence skill. So go ahead and roll two light dice.
Yeah. Okay, I get a token, but I do encounter something terrible.
All right, a 4. Great. Go ahead and note your token.
Noted.
The terrible thing that you notice. You stand there for a good long while. And I think you stand there long enough for the sun to actually start to set. The wolves have been just kind of lazing about their kill, kind of enjoying the warmth. They haven't noticed you at all. But eventually they get up. They all get up and walk towards the entrance of the manor house. And what they leave behind is the remainder of their kill, which you can now clearly see is a human corpse, a human.
Right.
Torn apart, its rib cage, a cornucopia of meat and blood and guts. And I think we'll just call that our session for now.
Cool.
And listeners, that's our show. We hope you enjoyed it. The Sixth Ring is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. And if you'd like to support this show financially, go to patreon.com/gauntlet. Every little bit that you can throw over there helps us a lot. Judd, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Did you have anything you want to plug this week?
Yeah, the blog and the podcast continue. I also have some PDFs. I'm kind of making an incursion, And right now it's just a Word doc. So I did this weird thing where I put up a cover and I put up the Word doc, so you could play it right now, and it's only $1. Yeah. And then as I get the layout better and better, the price will go up until it's somewhere between $3 and $5.
Oh, nice.
And so if you would like it, it's called A Village Near a Dungeon with a Necromancy Problem. And it's just a nice basic...
It's classic setup.
And a couple people have play tested it and have said like that they just had a lot of fun. I ran it and had a blast, and I'm hoping to run it some more. So yeah, check it out.
Awesome. And thanks so much to our wonderful producer, Rich Rogers.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, listeners. Take care. Hi, listeners. I wanted to let you know that Hearts of Wulin is now available to pre-order. Hearts of Wulin is a tabletop role-playing game of wuxia melodrama, powered by the apocalypse. In Hearts of Wulin, players take the role of skilled martial artists in a world of rival clans, conspiracies, and obligations. The game emulates films like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Chinese wuxia TV series like The Smiling Proud Wanderer and Fox Volant of the Snowy Mountain, and Chinese martial arts novels from the second half of the 20th century. In these tales, romance is as dangerous as a blade. Everyone has ties to factions, loves they can't quite express, and secrets which will shake them to their core. As in the source material, stories in Hearts of Wulin are driven by the characters' duties, romantic desires, and entanglements with other characters. You can pre-order the hardcover edition of Hearts of Wulin by following the link in the show notes. And as always, thanks so much for your support.